as it relates to the Manafort trial, I think it's really important to know, what is this case about? It's about whether or not Paul Manafort paid money, taxes, on money that he may or may not have been paid, having nothing to do with Russia. Not a thing to do with the Russia investigation. Nothing to do with getting information from Russia. It has to do with events in his life that go back to 2005 to 2007. It's basically tax charges on Paul Manafort. Now, the judge, T.S. Ellis III, in this particular case, he's the one that made the statement that Mueller and his merry band of Democratic donors and his pit bull Andrew Weissman and Jeannie Ray, who worked on the Clinton Foundation, and, of course, Bruce Orr's wife, of course, we could talk about her, too, separately. But Ellis is the guy that said they're trying to put the screws to Manafort to make him sing or make him compose. Compose would be suborning perjury, making up a story so he gets off the hook for the purposes of either prosecuting or impeaching Donald Trump. Well, now with the jury that has been picked in that trial today, it's very interesting to see that the judge, Judge Ellis, has made it clear that he thinks this case against Manafort is a witch hunt because they're trying to flip Manafort to get Trump. Anyway, prosecutors preparing for the witnesses in the upcoming trial, and the guidance to witnesses the judge has ordered particular here is very interesting. And it comes from Judge Ellis, who agreed Manafort's defense team that invoking the defendant's ties to the Trump campaign could unduly influence jurors, which he talks about the panel. The defense doesn't want to be prejudiced by association with Trump, he said, with a Northern Virginia jury, and they know that they may not be kindly disposed to the president. Well, now the judge has ordered, in this particular case, Manafort witnesses to avoid mentioning Trump's name. Anyway, Gregg Jarrett is with us. He's got the #1 book in the country right now on Amazon.com. It is called The Russian Hoax, The Illicit Scheme to Clear Hillary Clinton, Frame Donald Trump. David Schoen, civil rights and civil liberties attorney, both with us. What do you make of that order, Gregg Jarrett?
Well, I'm glad to see it, because any reference to Trump or his campaign would not only be irrelevant, but prejudicial in the eyes of the jurors. So this was the correct decision, because this case has nothing whatsoever to do with collusion with the Russians to influence the campaign. And in fact, this was an illegitimate prosecution, in my judgment, because under the authorization order for Robert Mueller, the special counsel, he is only permitted to bring a case that arises out of his investigation. This did not. This was dug out of the dusty archives of the tax division of the Department of Justice. This is an old case that they chose not to pursue for lack of evidence long ago. So this is an illegitimate prosecution, in my judgment.
You know, this was a case supposedly that was really resolved and going back many years ago. But they dug down deep. I think Judge Ellis had it right. He goes, I don't see any relation in this indictment and what it has to do with the special counsel in terms of being authorized to investigate. You really don't care about Mr. Manafort's so-called bank fraud. What you really care about is what information Mr. Manafort could give you that would reflect on Mr. Trump or lead to his prosecution or impeachment. This is the judge in this case. What do you think of the ruling, number one, David? And number two, the judge kind of got it right, but since then has kind of said, okay, the case goes forward. It's a 2005 political tax case criminalizing political differences, but I guess I have to follow the law. We know what's going on here.
Right, Gregg's right. The ruling, of course, is the right one. The defense will have to be careful not to open the door. But you said it early on in the show. The case has nothing to do with Russia. Listeners don't have to take your word for it. You happen to always be right, but they don't have to take your word for it. Yesterday, Greg Andres, one of the lead prosecutors in the case, is quoted in the newspaper saying, you may never hear the term Russia mentioned during the course of this case. You also have it right when you say this case had gone away. It's about from start to finish, sending a message to President Trump and trying to flip Manafort from start to finish. That's the MO of these prosecutors. And that's the other thing I think that the listeners have to know about this case. You've got Weissman, you've got Andres. These are two of the worst in here. I've had cases against both of them. Greg Andres fancied himself to be a bit of a boxer when he was younger. There's a case in the Eastern District in which I was involved. He squared off against one of the defense counsels. It was really a ridiculous scene. His wife, of course, is a President Obama appointee as a federal judge in the Southern District of New York. Longtime family of Democrats. Floyd Abrams, of course, one of the top First Amendment lawyers around. But that's what the case is about. Look, Judge Ellis is the first judge and the most important judge to make a clear statement in this case, a statement that you reported on this case in detail, when he said this is really just about trying to turn the screws to President Trump. He was shown then the mandate that Rod Rosenstein approved for Mueller. And that's the key. Clearly that mandate was broader than anyone could have anticipated, and we still haven't seen it. The public must demand to see the mandate that Rosenstein gave to Mueller. It clearly is far broader than anticipated.
I want to get into the weeds here, and you're two of the best attorneys that I know, and I really want people to understand how this system works, where you really put it, what does putting the screws to somebody means. You know, I look at somebody, what was Bull, what's his name? Sammy the Bull, right. Gravano, okay?
Right.
Guy that, if I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, killed 19 people. Mm-hmm. Okay, he doesn't get prosecuted for killing 19 people because his testimony, he's the little fish. He only killed 19. And then they're looking, I think in that particular case, was it John Gotti Sr.? They used him to go after John Gotti Sr. So he gets a get-out-of-jail-free card. He got a new life. He gets put in a witness protection program. He doesn't see any jail time. He admits he kills 19 people, and that's how they cut a deal. How does somebody like that have any credibility with a jury? Because if I'm on a jury and they say, oh, this guy killed 19 people, and he's saying that this guy killed 45 people, I'm making that up, therefore we're going to convict that guy, but this guy gets to get out of jail free card, a nice house out in Arizona.
You know, all too often, and I've seen it frequently, overzealous federal prosecutors and even state prosecutors suborn perjury from witnesses they're flipping. They give them sweetheart deals, get out of jail free card. In exchange, you must say the following. And quite often, it's not the entire truth. And that is actually suborning perjury by government officials. But they don't care because all they care about is their one-loss record and gaining a conviction. And I worry about it whenever people start talking about flipping witnesses like Manafort or Michael Cohen and others, because the heavy-handed, overzealous tactics of federal prosecutors is anathema to the rule of law and justice.
But let's talk about that. You have worked for some of the so-called big crime families over the years, haven't you?
Yes, I have. And I've proved that Sammy the Bull committed 20 murders, frankly. I interviewed the Iceman, Kuklinski, who killed a cop.
Were you involved in that case where they used him?
No, but he was the only witness against another client of mine. I handled the appeal rather than the trial in that case. He's the classic example, and it's not coincidental.
Can you tell us who the client was?
No, he's just gotten out of prison, actually.
Okay, I got you.
In any event...
But, I mean, that's the quintessential example. And
these are the guys who made those kinds of deals. This is Weissman, John Gleason at that time, and others in that crew. That's the same crew. That example wasn't coincidental. They took exactly what you said. Proven 19 murders, went back out on the street because he gave the testimony that they wanted to hear. And you know what else happened in that case? Another guy called Gaspipe Casso, who was a higher up in the family, said that Gravano was lying, that some of the things he said testified to could not have happened. I was there, and they didn't happen that way. You know what they did? They didn't like what Gaspipe Casso said. He's in the Supermax. Gravano's on the street, and Gravano goes back into the drug business when he gets to Arizona, back into prison.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm only using that as a high-profile example. I mean, how is it that a guy that's getting away with, you say, 20 murders, how does he have any credibility with a jury? But now, look, I know Manafort's partner, Rick Gates, whatever, he copped a deal. All these other people cop a deal. So, in other words, did they sing or compose because they want to get out of jail? How do you ascertain the truth in that case? Because to me, if you got something for your testimony and you got freedom for your testimony, I'm sorry, I'm not buying your credibility.
Yeah, this is the challenge for defense attorneys like David and a great many other really skilled defense attorneys. You can try to impeach the credibility of a witness on the stand like a Gravano and others.
And you get to tell the jury that they copped the deal.
Yes, but generally you don't have the financial resources and the access to information that the government does. And the government doesn't always fairly disclose it. So all you can do is ask the witness like Gravano, what are you getting out of this? And then you try to persuade the jury that he is lying to save himself.
Isn't it the law that the government has to hand over whatever the deal is?
Yeah, I wish they would abide by the law.
They don't abide by that?
Absolutely not.
Did the jury in that case know that Gravano got a deal for killing 19 people?
Yes.
Yeah, they know that.
They knew that.
But the government doesn't always disclose...
They didn't say he's gotten no jail time out of this.
Evidence that would help the defense attorney impeach the witness like Gravano.
But probably the worst thing of all that happens in that scenario is the prosecutor often is telling the witness what to say, either by hint or expressly. I have a witness right now who is prepared to testify that in a murder case, he's a mob guy, became a longtime informant, reliable according to them. Weissman and the others with him told him how to testify. They knowingly got a person indicted for a crime they knew he did not commit. This guy had admitted committing the crime. So these are the same characters. That's exactly what goes on. Now look, these are street guys or tough guys. They may be willing to say anything to help themselves. Take the white-collar guy in a Manafort case. This is a person who's never spent a day in jail in his or her life, wants to get back to the family. Weissman will turn the screws to a family member, the Flynn case, and otherwise. These people would say anything.
Listen, if the two FBI agents and Comey that interviewed General Flynn say they didn't see any evidence that he deceived or lied in any way, the only reason he copped that deal is he was going broke. He's had to mortgage and sell his house.
That's right.
And I would bet, I don't know for a fact, because his son was in the business, they probably said, well, we're going to investigate your son. And like any good father, he jumped and dove on the sword for his own kid.
What father wouldn't admit to a crime he didn't commit to save his son?
Everyone.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what Michael Flynn did. And the government, with its vast resources and unlimited power, unchecked power, can ruin an individual financially and personally, and that's what they did to Michael Flynn.
That's the whole story with Weissman. That's the whole problem with Mueller appointing this guy. Exculpatory evidence withheld, losing 9-0 in the Supreme Court, tens of thousands of people at Anderson Accounting losing their jobs, 4 innocent Merrill executives go to jail for a year only to be overturned by the Fifth Circuit. Maybe it's not a big deal to him, but a year of my life is worth something.
And that's what the people need to understand that you've been reporting about the Mueller investigation. Mueller knew who he was selecting for his team. Weissman was his right-hand man at the FBI. He knows his history. He knows his history, and he knows he only picked people of similar...
Why didn't he pick somebody that could win before the Supreme Court or not get overturned on appeal? We'll take a quick break. I'll get back to Gregg Jarrett and David Schoen in a second as the Manafort trial begins today, although they're never going to talk about Russia or Donald Trump. In this case, a 2005 tax case that had to do with the Ukraine. It's ridiculous. Let's go back and all the Democrats that said, no evidence of collusion, smoke but fire, no evidence of this. And then, of course, if you want collusion, we actually have the conversation of shifty little Adam Schiff, the biggest liar in America, and he thinks he wants to get naked pictures of Donald Trump, and he thinks he's talking to a Russian, the dope. And it turned out to be a hoax against him. And then, of course, Obama's comments, and then we'll get back to our analysis here.
But Mr. Clapper then went on to say that, to his knowledge, there was no evidence of collusion between members of the Trump campaign and the Russians. We did not conclude any evidence in our report. And when I say our report, that is the NSA, FBI, and CIA, with my office, the Director of National Intelligence, that had any reflection of collusion between the members of the Trump campaign and the Russians. There was no evidence of that in our report. Was Mr. Clapper wrong when he said that?
I think he's right about characterizing the report, which you all have read.
We did not include any evidence in our report, and I say our, that's NSA, FBI, and CIA with my office, the Director of National Intelligence, that had any reflection of collusion between members of the Trump campaign and the Russians. There was no evidence of that included in our report.
Have you seen anything, either intelligence briefings, anything to back up any of the accusations that you've made?
They have the documentation that they did the hacking.
The hacking.
On the DNC.
Right.
And on some of us, that have...
But the collusion, though?
No, we have not.
Do you have evidence that there was, in fact, collusion between Trump associates and Russia during the campaign?
Not at this time.
Okay, and so Buseva met with Trump in New York at some point after the 2013 Miss Universe
yes.
pageant.
Absolutely, and she got compromising materials on Trump after their short relations.
Okay, and what's the nature of the compromise?
Well, there were pictures of naked Trump.
Okay. And so Putin was made aware of the availability of the compromising material?
Yes, of course. Buzova shared those materials with Sobchak, and Sobchak shares those materials with Putin because she's a goddaughter of Putin, and Putin decided to press on Trump. And the materials that you can provide to the committee or to the FBI, would they corroborate this allegation? Sure, of course. When they were in Ukraine, we got their conversation by the phone where they discussed those compromising materials. We are ready to provide it to FBI.
So you have recordings of both Sobchak and Buzova where they're discussing the compromising material on Mr. Trump?
Absolutely.
I wanted to present you, which represents what President Obama and Vice President Biden and I have been saying. And that is, we want to reset our relationship. And so we will do it together.
Thank you very much.
You are very welcome. We worked hard to get the right Russian word. Do you think we got it?
You get it wrong.
I got it wrong.
It should be перезагрузка. And this says перегрузка, which means overcharge.
Well, we won't let you do that to us. I promise.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
We'll be on my desk.
This is my last lecture for you. Yeah. And after my lecture, I have more flexibility. Yeah. And I transmit information to Vladimir and Alexander.
All right, my favorite there is what Adam Schiff did there. Is that collusion?
No.
What a dope.
It's no more collusion than Donald Trump Jr. meeting in Trump Tower with a Russian lawyer who purportedly has information about Hillary Clinton but never provides any. In neither case is it collusion. But
the very thing they're saying about that meeting at Trump Tower, where everybody in the meeting, notes from the meeting, everybody said it was about the adoption.
Right, Magnitsky Act.
Right, and then nobody, it was a waste of their time.
Sure.
Okay, although this Russian woman meets with Fusion GPS before and after the meeting, I'm sure a mere coincidence. Forgive me for being suspicious. And you got Adam Schiff over there doing his thing.
Well, and you've got Hillary Clinton, who has got an ex-MI6 spy on the payroll and paying money for information about Donald Trump sourced allegedly from Russians, anonymously sourced, and double, triple, and quadruple hearsay. But she's paying money, which is a thing of value in a campaign and a direct violation of the Federal Campaign Election Act. In egregious cases, that is a crime, and yet nobody is investigating Hillary Clinton. Nobody is accusing Hillary Clinton of collusion, which isn't even a crime, but it is a violation of the Federal Campaign Election Act.
All right, David, what's your take on all of this?
Well, first of all, on that subject, worst case scenario, the Trump campaign were approached with opposition research. That's part of the process. Now, does anybody in this country with a straight face think that if Hillary Clinton or anyone involved with her campaign or a supporter were presented with opposition research regarding Donald Trump or any other candidate on that panel in the primaries, they would have looked the other way? Well, we don't have to guess. Because not only didn't they not look the other way, they paid for it. They paid for that so-called opposition research.
They paid, well, it was bought and paid for, but they didn't tell the FISA court judges. All right, here's the next question. So we were talking before about the Sammy the Bull Gravano case, and he kills, you say 20. I thought it was reported at 19.
It was reported at 19.
Okay, and he gets a pass, a get-out-of-jail-free card. He gets in the witness protection program. He's sent to Arizona, ends up committing some drug crime out there. All right, but let's go to other cases. Now, will we find out in this case what Manafort's partner, what deal Rick Gates got? Is Rick Gates going to tell us if he got no jail time?
generally speaking, yes, that is disclosed, and usually prosecutors want to get it out front so that it doesn't emerge on cross-examination, but they try to soft-pedal it and stand up for the credibility of the witness, even though most of them who flip have no credibility.
But, I mean, this is the thing. If you've worked with a lot of juries, David, I mean, in your time with juries in these cases where people have basically flipped and they're getting deals from the prosecution, and they said, aren't they willing to compose people? Let's be honest.
100
to save their ass.
100%. It's a script written by the prosecutors often. These two are classic for doing that sort of thing, and they'll say anything. Now, look, does the jury look at it skeptically? You would hope so. And by the way, the defense is entitled, this is how lacking in credibility they are. The defense is entitled to a jury instruction that specifically tells the juror they should take with a grain of salt, in essence, a testimony by a person who's testified with a deal. But remember...
But how many people in this case have deals?
Well, we don't know that. We don't know what deal Manafort was offered, by the way, based on your earlier question. Manafort may be a person of principle who's simply not willing to lie, to take
what
whatever...
What if he doesn't? He only worked for Trump for, 3 months?
Yeah, he may have nothing valuable enough to them to give him. But there are people who will stand up. There's a fellow right now, as a result of this show, who's called me up in a white-collar case, using a major firm now.
I mean, a guy listening in jail, or...?
No, he's out.
Oh, he's out of jail?
A very respectable guy.
Yeah.
Had a stock brokerage firm. But he eventually had an SEC case against him and then was indicted from Weissman's office when Weissman was with Maine DOJ. The lawyer he's using now used to work with Weissman. This man says there's absolutely no evidence of criminal conduct against him. And the lawyer said to him, you know what? That's Weissman's M.O. I can see in my mind's eye, the lawyer who worked closely with Weissman said, I can see Weissman leaning back in his chair and saying, F him. I don't care if there's no evidence. Indict him.
Why have I so naively in my life believed in the justice system and believe it's imperfect, but you're laughing at me, and by the way, I probably deserve it for my naivete. It's fine, say it.
That's a false image, and I can tell you from the trenches as a defense attorney that I saw too many unprincipled and unscrupulous prosecutors who would do anything to gain a conviction. Now, look, I've also known a lot of fine, honorable, honest prosecutors who would not do that. But unfortunately, that is not the case with all of them.
What about, I know we're all following the Mueller case, but you got this other case in the Southern District of New York, which, according to everybody that I've ever interviewed or talked to over the years, that's the elite district in terms of the lawyers that are involved, the people and their credentials. A lot of great political figures have come out of there as a result of high-profile cases that they're involved in. Do you believe they're honest and ethical?
There are some who are honest and ethical. When Michael Horowitz was in that office, he was honest and ethical. He still is as the IG, I believe. He came in, he saw government corruption in the case, and he threw out some convictions. But still, remember, we have prosecutors who, by and large, get ego involved. We have leaders of those offices trying to make a name for themselves. And anything can go on. Look, I still think there's a story to be learned about as to how the Mueller team gave that case to the Southern District. Because remember, you've got a member of the Mueller team, Andrew Goldstein, who comes out of the division that case was given to. I can't believe there was no communication about that. Maybe that's a safety valve. If the Mueller investigation is over, that's still going on. But look, as taxpayers, we have to ask ourselves, how long does it go on? How much money is being spent? And what we understood the Mueller mandate to be, what on earth are we doing with a full team prosecuting Manafort under the guise of the Mueller investigation?
Well, and factor in the fact, Sean, that this was an illegitimate special prosecutor appointment to begin with.
Does that matter in the end? Would that matter on appeal, that it was an illegitimate investigation to begin with?
It should. Whether or not you can sell that on appeal is an open question. But I spent an entire chapter of the book. It's entitled The Illegitimate Appointment of Robert Mueller. To put it quite simply, under the regulations for the special counsel, there has to be a stated crime. I challenge anyone to look at that statement of authorization for the appointment of Robert Mueller and identify a crime anywhere in the criminal codes.
There's only the need for one juror to say, I don't believe this is right. One person, 6 men, 6 women chosen, and 4 alternates chosen. How hard you do this defense work? What's your percentage of wins and losses, David?
I mean, they've got to play it pretty strong in that case to a juror. That's the way to play this case.
Play to a specific juror.
I think they'll have a sense of the jurors early on in this case. They're going to have to play this case for that. Listen, that's a tough. It's not coincidental they picked Northern Virginia. The Eastern District of Virginia is very tough for this kind of case. They happen to have drawn a good judge for this case because he's shown skepticism already. That's unusual. Remember, people only woke up. So
that'll matter when we get jury instructions.
That's right, and it'll matter during the course of the case. Trial. You know, how the evidence is presented to the jury.
But this is what you do. You go in court and you argue, right?
Yes. That's
okay.
Right.
And what's your success rate? I'm not trying to put... And you take on some of the hardest cases.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on how you say it. Outright wins don't come so often with a jury. But most cases don't go to the jury. But I would say in each case I've tried, certainly come up one...
Is this case going to the jury? I believe it will.
Yeah, right now, every reason to believe. But remember, Manafort can flip at any time during the course of this case. And again, these are people...
And if they think they're losing... They might cut their losses.
They might, and it may change the deal. But there's a reason they wanted Manafort locked up. And this and every other case like this...
For a tax fraud reason that had nothing to do with Russia.
And to turn the screws to him before trial. He can't prepare properly from his jail cell, and he starts thinking, my God, what would my life be like 10 years ago?
But he's got another case he's got to deal with.
That's right.
Which may be, an even more difficult case.
I think a far more difficult case considering the judge in that case. All right. Thank you both. Congrats on the book, The Russian Hoax, in bookstores everywhere, Hannity.com.